Blessings, good evening. Today we chanted the Paritas, the 3 months of the Vasa, the range retreat, is a good time to learn new chants, suttas, Paritas. So if you have a Parita that you like the sound of, but you don't know it yet, you haven't learnt it, this is a good time to set your goal. Which Parita will you learn, which you'll commit to memory through the Vasa period. Then it becomes something you can chant and reflect on anytime. Tonight we have a few questions have come in, being Tuesday night. So first question is, I would really like to practice more Dhamma, but I have young kids to look after. Do you have any advice? Well, I would say one of the amazing things about Dhamma is you can practice in any situation. Admittedly, some situations are more challenging than others, but whether you're monastic or layperson, single, married, with kids, without kids, every posture is a basis for establishing mindfulness, meaning standing, walking, sitting, lying down. And from there onwards, every aspect of life is a part of the practice. So even if you have family, if you have kids, of course that's going to absorb a lot of your time and energy. No way around it. But there's many aspects of the practice you can still be developing as you do this, such as we have the Noble Eightfold Path. A basic aim is to recognize and understand suffering, abandon its cause, and experience the end of suffering. And the Eightfold Path will get us there. So, say particularly cultivating right view by listening to Dhamma will help. And even if you have to look after your kids a lot of the time, I know you're very busy, lots of activities these days. When I was a kid, they just sent us out. When I was 7 years old, they just sent me to the park or the forest. Even though I was living in the city, there were woods and forests around. And I'd disappear for half a day or a day. I'd walk to school, walk back. Nowadays, everybody has activities, after-school activities, this and that to do. Parents are constantly driving and managing their kids. So perhaps it's more demanding, what's expected of you as a parent, but still, develop right view, listen to Dhamma, you're in the car, when you've got a few moments before you go to sleep at night, in the morning, when you're preparing food for those kids, you can be listening to Dhamma. We have the opportunity to listen and learn Dhamma as we go through the day, get right view, and that will give you some guidance on what else you can develop. So obviously, right thought, right mindfulness, right effort, right speech. If you've got kids, then as an adult, you have to be a good example with your speech. And if you put effort into practicing right speech, you'll be giving a great gift to your kids. A speech that is based in metta, goodwill, speech that is true. We think about the best time and place to say what we have to say, the best situation. Think about the words we choose, how easily are they listened to, are they well received, are they going to be well received by the listener? And so on. There's many aspects to the practice of right speech, as well as avoiding wrong speech, lying, abusive speech, divisive speech, foolish chatter. Just practicing right speech and avoiding wrong speech is a great gift to your kids. So your own practice and helping the kids go hand in hand. Same with right action. What you do, your kids will see and be a witness to. So practicing right action, non-killing, non-stealing, not committing acts of sexual misconduct, harmful sex, and not drinking, getting intoxicated. All of these are really good gifts for your kids to witness, to see as they live with you. How do you manage the bugs around your house that may come into your house? You can teach your kids they don't have to necessarily kill bugs, but maybe there's ways you can prevent them coming in or catch them and release them outside. Being honest, teaching your kids how to treat other people with respect, other people's property, other people's person, other people's reputation. What we do flows on to our kids, so if we make our speech and actions part of the practice, then our kids are gaining the greatest gift from that, through example, by example. And even if occasionally you let your kids see you meditating or even chanting or listening to Dhamma, that's subtly going into their consciousness, just observing your practice. May only be for brief periods, or you actually get them to sit down for a few minutes, learn to sit still, watch the breath, practice metta meditation, say before they go to bed. Many young kids and their families have come to the monastery and they said, oh, this boy, this girl can't sleep properly, they have nightmares, they have restless sleep. Getting them to practice metta meditation or breathing meditation for a few moments before they sleep often can have dramatic effects on the quality of their sleep and their state of mind through the night. And it also gives them something to turn to when they are panicked or nervous or unhappy. So there's a whole range of things you can do, either as an example for your kids or with your kids. And this, I would say, is part of the job of a parent, is to pass on the Dhamma to kids. So even though, of course, it's tiring and challenging having kids, just make them part of your practice and manage your expectations. So you're not expecting to maybe go on to month-long solitary retreats when you've got young kids. Maybe later in life you can, but at the time you have to look after young kids where you have to adjust your practice to fit with the situation. So I think there's plenty of scope still to practice with young kids. You just have to think about it, how you can apply the teachings and make them part of your life. And don't forget, in the time of the Buddha, even little 7-year-olds were getting enlightened. So there's always opportunities for kids to even practice the Dhamma as well. Next question. Luang Por, how to make everything in your monastic life an act of service to others? Well, be careful, because you could overdo it. You could burn yourself out if you're trying to serve everybody all the time or make everything into an act of service. And Buddhism has this principle, helping oneself in order to help others. The only people in the world who truly serve everyone, serve others, are arahants, because they're no longer caught into greed, anger and delusion, so that all their behavior becomes unselfish and not self-centered, and they become a blessing for the world. So that may be your goal, but you have to accept, while you're still an unenlightened person training in the Dhamma, practicing the Dhamma, you'll have a mixture of the the wholesome states of mind and the unwholesome sometimes. So if you become too idealistic and say, I've got to serve everyone all the time, make everything an act of service, well, there'll be times when you maybe get burnt out trying to do that, trying to fulfill that ideal. Physically get burnt out, mentally can get burnt out. One thing that many teachers point out to their new students is, well, it's not entirely selfish to practice for yourself on your own sometimes, or do things like meditation, which doesn't immediately seem like an act of service for others, but when you're meditating, you're improving all these aspects of the path, right effort, right mindfulness, developing states of stillness, developing insight, which ultimately will help other people and serve the community very well. But you have to train yourself first in these qualities. If you rush off to serve everyone else too quickly, you may be serving them with a mind of defilement. So when we get burnt out, what happens? We try too hard to help others, serve others, we get tired, we get discouraged, disappointed, angry, fed up, frustrated. And if you don't yet have the skills and the mindfulness and insight to let go of those negative states, well, they can overwhelm you. We can get, as we serve others, we can get angry with the world because, the world is not perfect. We see other people's faults. We're always going out trying to serve others. We're not seeing our own faults, maybe. Or we're getting upset with other people's faults and the injustices of the world, and then where we're trying to serve others, maybe we actually can harm others or get caught into these more negative thoughts ourselves. So especially in the beginning, I would recommend a sort of balance where you put a lot of effort into your personal practice with the long-term goal, maybe of serving others and doing it for the benefit of all beings. And certainly we can have that aspiration, and when we meditate we can spread thoughts of kindness and compassion to others. But you also have to be compassionate to yourself as you're doing this. So you need your own time to develop your own mindfulness, knowledge of the Dhamma, study, learn, practice, until you have this firm foundation, and then maybe you can offer more to the rest of the community. So service is very much a part of Buddhist monasticism and just Buddhist practice in general, serving in society in different ways. But it has to be done with wisdom. We have to know our limit, know our skills, where we need to develop more. We have to observe where mental defilements, greed, anger, delusion come up in our practice as we serve others, and then sometimes we have to address our own defilements first before we can help others effectively, and we have to recognize that. So it's not always selfish or indulgent to go and meditate and train yourself before you go and help others. You might think, well, this is not serving anyone. But maybe it is in a subtle way. You're even meditating, you're practicing precepts, you're not bothering anyone, hurting anyone. In a way, that's a kind of offering to the world. And if your own state of mind improves, you have more mindfulness, more wisdom and understanding, more compassion from your meditation, from your own personal contemplation and practice, well, that will start to come out in your behavior. Of course, sometimes we do specific acts of service. So in monastic communities, many people will always take on duties, and it can be something as simple as just looking after your dwelling place. Because when you look after your dwelling place, you're not only benefiting yourself, but the next person who comes along to use that dwelling place will also benefit. You look after your robes, the people around you get a good example. If you're careful with your robes, you keep them well maintained, you look after them properly, follow the rules and training rules with them, other people are supported in their practice of looking after their robes. You look after your alms bowl, and that will help others to look after their alms bowl, and so on. Often just by practicing well yourself, keeping the rules and the training practices of a Buddhist monk or a nun, you're supporting others in their practice, albeit in a subtle way. It doesn't always have to be kind of going out and teaching and doing things for other people so much. Part of our practice is also just being a good example, following the rules of training, practicing restraint, mindfulness, and then other people will benefit from that as well. But of course, dana and service is very much part of our practice. So even in a monastery, you can do acts of dana, helping others, giving things to others. You don't have much as a monastic to give. You have a few requisites, maybe a few gifts, a few things you have. So sometimes people practice a bit of dana, giving something precious that they have to someone else. Partly to teach themselves to let go, partly as an act of kindness to the other person. So sometimes we do that with treats. We get given, say we receive some food in our bowl, we can share that with another person, or some drinks, or some allowable medicine in the evening, or we are given some requisite, maybe sometimes we pass that on, or we do things for others, we sew robes for others, we help others with their tasks. Of course, we do this all the time. But you have to know the right limit and also know how to help yourself as well as helping others. Often I find the people who are wisest in the practice become the kindest. But that wisdom was attained through practicing for themselves first. So once they're established in their practice, they develop sila, samadhi, panya, then they can help many people, and they won't go astray, and they won't teach the wrong things, and they won't get caught into depression or get burnt out on what they're doing, because they know themselves very well, following the Buddhist teachings. So our teacher Ajahn Chah is a great example. He spent 15 years wandering around the forest. He was still helping others to a certain extent, but he also spent a lot of time meditating and living in seclusion. But then, because he developed great wisdom, great strength of mind, patience, compassion, after that he started his monastery. He was able to help many, many people. But he always said he had to develop that firm foundation first. If he didn't have that, then he wouldn't be able to help others. And also there's many ways of helping, aren't there? The wiser you become, the more effective your way to serve the community becomes. So it's not like Ajahn Chah answered every question he was given, or did everything that people requested of him, asked of him. Sometimes his teaching was just practicing equanimity or patience in a situation, or being quite quiet. Sometimes he wouldn't answer people's question. You might say, well, that's not serving the community. If they ask you a question, you don't answer. But then maybe the answer was in the silence. Maybe the question was the wrong question, or an unnecessary one, or whatever. So sometimes he could be silent. Sometimes he would, leave people to find out for themselves. His compassion may be just providing them an opportunity to practice, but then leave them to learn for themselves. And he wouldn't do everything for others. Sometimes we get attached to serving others, don't we? We want to help, serve. But sometimes the more effective way in some situations with some people is just to leave them to it. Even if it means they're floundering around for a little while till they find their way. Sometimes you let them do that. Another question. Luang Por, may I know why when we regularly cultivate metta in meditation, it means we will fall into anger with difficulty? What is the root cause? Isn't meditation itself supposed to be calming the mind, making the mind clear, bringing us wisdom and skill? When our anger arises, you note it, breathe in and breathe out, relax, not holding on to it, and let the anger go. Well, of course, yeah, sometimes that is correct. Seeing anger as a mental state, it's a feeling, it's a thought formation together. There's usually there's a perception there, negative perception of some sort. Your ultimate goal is to see it all as impermanent, as not self, to be abandoned, not to be clung to as self. But in getting to that point where you can do that effectively, often we develop a lot of metta along the way. Because metta is not only changing our thoughts from anger to goodwill, but it's also preventing further anger arising. So it's also a preventative practice. So in the Buddhist path we have right effort to prevent unarisen, unwholesome states from arising. So you're ahead of the game. You know you might get angry, so you develop metta before you're even angry. So you're ready. And you notice if you develop a lot of metta in meditation, just in your reflections, you think metta, you talk metta, you walk metta, you do metta in different ways, then in a situation where anger is triggered, it's much easier to return to the goodwill, the tolerance, the letting go, because you're so familiar with that mental state. But if anger has arisen, well, that's one way to let go of it is by turning the mind to the opposite, goodwill. So say you're angry with a person, you look for the good in that person, remind yourself of the good in that person to help bring your mind back to a place of balance or in a situation. So even in a situation of suffering, you may be able to find some good in it. You may learn a lesson from that suffering, and there's some good there that helps your anger to diminish. So of course we do still fall into anger, but when we are angry, to have a metta, goodwill, as one practice that we can quickly bring into play at that time, as quickly as we can. And as we practice more, we'll get better at it, more skilled, quicker to develop metta when we're angry. But ultimately, yes, we're developing enough mindfulness and insight to just see all mental states. This is what we call cittanupassana satipatthana. Seeing mental states as impermanent, not self. So anger, what does anger do? Anger is triggered by something. Sense contact, you see, you hear, you remember. Ill will arises, but in its nature it's a mental state that arises and then passes away. If you can establish mindfulness and reflect on that, that will help it to pass away all the quicker. And if you do that a lot, maybe as soon as anger is arising, you know this will pass too, and you quickly let go of it. When we forget that anger is impermanent, not self, that it's suffering, we indulge it. So we keep thinking those thoughts. We hold on and identify with the unpleasant feeling, we think the thoughts, and often we even say and do things based on the anger, and it intensifies it, reinforces it, makes the whole situation worse for us and maybe for others as well. So your aim is to bring up the mindfulness and say, this is just another mental state. We've been angry many times in the past, so it's not surprising that certain situations or people trigger more anger, because we've done it before, we thought it before, we felt it before. But as you reflect more on this, you recognize that. I've been angry so many times. I'm bound to be triggered, that my anger is triggered in this situation. But as you establish mindfulness, you know this is just old karmic habits coming up. And you just maintain mindfulness at that point and then let it pass quickly. You might say to yourself, no, don't go there. Don't indulge it. Don't hold on to it. Let it go. And ultimately, you maybe don't have to think or do much at all. You just maintain mindfulness, and anger arises and ceases before your very eyes. The idea is not to let it establish itself in the mind, even for a moment, if you can. Or reduce the number of moments. So, when you first practice, you might be angry for ages. And I'm angry, but there's not much you can do about it. You just go around with this angry mood, and there's a vague awareness, this is no good, this is suffering, but there's nothing you can do. But if you keep practicing regularly, precepts, mindfulness, insight, you get to the point where you can actually interrupt the flow of that anger and let it go more quickly. Maybe turn to goodwill, or just see it's impermanent, it's not self, let it go. The way monks in the forest do it, they get angry, so they start walking meditation and they say, I won't stop till the anger subsided. So they know it's impermanent, they know it's not self, they let it go, and they won't stop practicing until they've done that. Could be anger, could be fear, could be any mental defilement. Could do it when you're sitting. I'm not going to get up from sitting meditation until my anger subsided. You can even invent practices for yourself. Little tasks you set yourself. Every time you notice yourself giving into anger, indulging, then you make yourself do something like, I got to sit meditation longer today because I was giving into my anger. Or you could even kind of make life hard for yourself because of your anger. You say, I'm not going to go and enjoy that thing I wanted to enjoy, that bit of entertainment, or go and see my friend, or eat that nice bit of food. I'm not going to do it because I gave into my anger today. I'm going to teach myself it's more important to let go of my anger and clean up my mind than indulging the desire to do something pleasurable. You teach yourself. If you've got the goal that you want a mind purified from greed, anger, delusion, you have to commit yourself, get sincere about it, and see, you've got to find methods where you can become mindful of the anger, and then you teach yourself to let it go in whatever way works. Another question. How much mindfulness do we need to let go of defilements? As much as it takes, which is a lot. Basically in all postures at all times, isn't it? That's what we're aiming for. If you're perfectly mindful of body, feelings, mental formations, mental states, and the Dhamma, the process, the Four Noble Truths, suffering and how it arises and how it ceases. If you're perfectly mindful, then the Buddha said you might become enlightened in 7 days. So 7 days of perfect mindfulness will do it. If not 7 days, 7 weeks, 7 months, 7 years, 7 lifetimes. Could be 3 lifetimes, doesn't have to be 7. But 7 is the sort of standard number. Just be as mindful as you can. We always aim for the present moment to bring up the mindfulness so that wisdom can assess, is this mind state wholesome or unwholesome? Is it to be abandoned, to be developed? What's the right way to practice in this situation? If you're mindful, you can be aware of your precepts, you can be aware of your interaction with the world, what's coming to your senses. So it's a quality the Buddha said we always need. It's always useful. It's always supportive of the practice. So there's always something you can do. You're never at a loose end practicing Buddhism. You've got every opportunity to develop mindfulness. So, put the phone down, go back to the breath, reflect on your precepts, watch your state of mind, how you're feeling, what you're thinking, rather than endlessly getting lost in your experience. There's always more we can do. So, the reason we practice meditation every day is to improve this quality of mindfulness. So, if you can meditate for 30 minutes, that's great. Of those 30 minutes, how much mindfulness do you have? You really investigate this. Notice you'll have a whole gap in the middle when you're 15 minutes, you've just been letting your mind wander all over the place, planning and scheming or falling asleep. That's where we have to come back to and say, this is the task, this is the practice. How to reduce these periods where the mind is not awake, when the mind is either asleep in daydreams or literally asleep. So they call the practice awakening. That means becoming mindful and insightful of the way the world is. So every moment you've got the opportunity to practice like that. If you find it daunting, I've got to be mindful all the time, and it sounds like hard work, well, just be mindful now in this moment, then do it again. And just keep it going. Just moment by moment. If that helps you, do it that way, think in that way. You don't have to think about last life, next life, tomorrow. It's just right now, right here, right now. This is the important moment. This is where you have to be mindful. Last question tonight. It's in Thai, very small print. I'll speak in Thai a little bit, then I'll give a translation. กราบนมัสการพระอาจารย์เราจะสามารถเมตตาคนที่เขาเคยจับผิดเราตลอดเวลาได้ยังไงครับ ก็เหมือนที่พูดเป็นภาษาอังกฤษเราต้องเจริญเมตตาทุกวันเมตตาภาวนาด้วยสวดมนต์ด้วยพิจารณาถึงอารมณ์เมตตาให้มันขึ้นมาในความคิดเป็นเขาเรียกสัมมาสังกัปโปคิดไม่เบียดเบียนคิดหวังดีต่อตัวเองกับคนอื่นส่วนคนที่เคยแผงโทษเราก็คงจะมีฝังอยู่ในใจความจำเขาเคยว่าเราบ่อยๆทำให้เรารู้สึกทุกข์ไม่สบายใจหมดกำลังใจหดหู่ส่วนหนึ่งก็เราต้องพิจารณาอันนี้เป็นอดีตเป็นแค่ความจำเวลามันขึ้นมาเราต้องมีสติบอกว่าอันนี้คืออดีตนะปัจจุบันคนนั้นอาจจะไม่ได้อยู่กับเราแล้วไปที่อื่นให้ปล่อยวางส่วนอดีตก็รู้ว่าเป็นอดีตเป็นอนิจจารมณ์เป็นความจำก็ปล่อยวางส่วนคนนั้นเรายังมีสัญญาว่าคนนั้นเป็นศัตรูเป็นคนที่เราไม่ชอบก็พยายามมองเห็นคนนั้นก็ยังเป็นมนุษย์อาจจะยังมีคุณงามความดีของเขายังปรารถนามีความสุขพยายามเห็นมีส่วนคล้ายๆกับเราส่วนกรรมที่เขาเคยแผงโทษเราสร้างปัญหาสร้างความทุกข์แก่เราก็นับว่าเป็นวิบากกรรมเก่าของเราอาจจะเคยทำอย่างนี้ด้วย ลองดูจิตใจตัวเองเรามีบ้างไหมจะเป็นโทษคนอื่นถ้าเรายังมีให้มาแก้ตรงนี้ก่อนส่วนคนนั้นเขาต้องแก้ของเขาเองเราไม่ต้องไปรักเขาไม่ต้องไปชอบเขาแต่ให้เรารู้ว่าคนนั้นมีกิเลสเขาก็แสดงกิเลสกับเราในอดีตโอเคมันไม่ดีแต่มันผ่านไปแล้วเขาเองก็ต้องทุกข์ต่อไปรับวิบากกรรมถ้าเขาทำตามกิเลสแต่เราจะทำตามกิเลสไหมเราจะเพ่งโทษคนอื่นไหมถ้าเราเพ่งโทษคนอื่นเราก็จะทุกข์เหมือนกันนะอย่าไปทำพยายามเจริญเมตตาให้อภัยแล้วคนนั้นถ้าเราหลีกเลี่ยงก็หลีกเลี่ยงได้ถ้าเป็นไปได้ถ้าหลีกเลี่ยงไม่ได้ยังต้องเจอก็ต้องตั้งตัวมีสติอดทนเวลาอยู่กับเขาถ้าเขายังเพ่งโทษเราก็ต้องอดทนรู้นิสัยเขาก็อย่าถือก็เป็นนิสัยเขาขาดสติเขาไม่รู้เขาทำอะไรนิสัยเขาเป็นอย่างนั้นเองเราก็ทำหน้าที่ของเราพยายามทำหน้าที่ของเราให้ดีในสิ่งที่เราต้องทำเราทำงานดูแลครอบครัวดูแลลูกทำอะไรปฏิบัติธรรมของเราก็ทำให้ดีเขาจะเพ่งโทษไม่เพ่งโทษเรื่องของเขาเรามาดูจิตใจดูการกระทำของเราทุกวันว่ามันดีไหมถ้ามันยังไม่ดีเราต้องยอมรับเรายังไม่ดีเราต้องพัฒนาตัวเองด้วยถ้าเรารู้สึกทำดีแล้วสิ่งที่เขาเพ่งโทษมาไม่จริงก็ไม่ต้องทุกข์ไม่ต้องโกรธเพราะเป็นเรื่องไม่จริงเขามีปัญหาของเขาเองช่างเขาไม่ต้องไปสนใจมากนับว่าถือว่าเป็นกรรมเก่าก็สำคัญรักษาสติในปัจจุบันถ้ามีสติแล้วเราพิจารณาได้ปล่อยวางได้ The last question was about if there's somebody in your life who in the past has been causing you suffering because they've always been finding fault with you, constantly finding fault with you. How do we practice with this? Well, if it really is in the past, you're no longer with that person, it will now be a memory that pops up. When you think of them, you feel unhappy in what they've said and done in the past. So that unhappy feeling and those thoughts that come up when the memory arises, you have to establish mindfulness. This is a memory now. If it's no longer happening, you're actually free from that. And you have to treat the memory, you accept it, and you treat it as impermanent, not self. It's something to be let go of now. You acknowledge it and let it go. You can't erase the past, so you have to accept that was karma. Maybe it was your karma that this happened, but if it's over now, you're free from it, and you can move on and just keep being mindful of the memory rather than indulging in it and making more suffering in the present out of that memory. If you still have to meet that person and still you're not free of them in your life, then you have to establish mindfulness, be very patient, and you have to come back to yourself. You say, do I do this? That's the first thing I tend to do, is say, do I have that weakness? Do I find fault with others and make them miserable by finding fault with them? So if you can see that fault in others who do it to you, well, try not to do it yourself. Maybe the first thing. And then see the suffering of that behavior and see, well, maybe if you're still getting it from someone else, maybe this is part of old karma, this causes from this in the past and it's coming your way, but now you establish your mind in mindfulness, patience, and if you're mindful you can think, can't you? You can say, is this true what they're saying? They're finding fault with you. Am I really at fault, or is this just a bad habit of theirs that's coming out with me at this time? And you don't have to suffer if what they're saying is not true. You don't have to suffer. You can let it go, because what they're saying is not true. They're just troublemaking. If there's some truth in it, if you can, you recognize that and you say, oh, actually, yeah, there's some truth in this. I am not perfect, and they picked a fault of mine that is true. Okay, maybe they're helping me to see my faults. I'll just have to accept that. It's unpleasant, but I'll accept it. But establish your mind in mindfulness, and then you can reflect rather than just react with emotion. Oh, I hate this, why do they keep doing this? And what that will lead to, tend to lead to, is you want to get back at them and seek revenge and get angry with them. If what they're saying is not true, just ignore them. Carry on doing what you're doing. So come back to your own task, your own job, your own role, your own place in life, and focus on that. They're going to have to deal with their own bad habits, if that's what it is. And we have to become stronger through the practice as we become more mindful. We have to let go. If we're not sure that we're not doing anything wrong, we'll just let it go and then ignore them. There are those annoying things in life. There'll always be a fly buzzing around, a mosquito. There'll always be aches and pains. There'll always be somebody finding fault with us. It's just part of life. We have to see that and establish mindfulness and understand, sometimes we get praise, sometimes we get blame. It's just worldly dhammas. If there's any truth in it, learn from that. If there's not, just let it go. So, that's the end of tonight's Q&A. We wish you well in your practice, and we'll see you next time.